Hi everyone, it's your host Natasha Tour, and welcome back to Mindfully Human podcast. Today we're going to be talking about something I believe is relevant to a lot of us, and that is our relationships with ourselves. A lot of us spend time trying to improve the relationships we have with other people, but we forget to look what's underneath all that, and that is our relationship with ourselves. And so the relationships we have with ourselves is a blueprint on how we form relationships with other people. And what I mean by this is that, if you struggle with trusting yourself, you might seek validation or reassurance from others. If you don't believe in yourself as worthy of respect, then you'll form relationships that, overstep your boundaries and where people don't show you that respect. And so the way we speak to ourselves, the way we care for ourselves, and the way we value ourselves doesn't just affect our confidence, but it affects our boundaries, the relationships we form, our friendships. It affects every decision we make in everyday life. And so today's episode, we're going to kind of talk about how we develop this relationship with ourselves and how it impacts our lives. And I'm also going to give you a little exercise at the end to get you to start thinking about your own relationship with yourselves. So, to start off, I spent my entire life having a horrible relationship with myself. Honestly, it wasn't until like maybe 3.5 years ago when I decided to, take a step back and I realized, something's not right. Something's not right. And I think over time, I just realized that I wasn't happy with who I was and the person I was becoming. And honestly, it felt like I was hitting rock bottom. And so when I finally gave myself that time to like sit back and reflect, I had realized that I had built a life that looked good from the outside, but to me, it didn't feel good. And so I was making a lot of decisions that were based on what other people wanted, what other people expected, or what I thought I needed to do. And I think somewhere along the line, while doing that over and over again, I lost like my connection with myself. And that's why this topic is super important to me because healing for me didn't start when I started to, change my friendships or change the circumstances I was living in. I think it began when I started to rebuild that relationship I had with myself. And I think that's something a lot of people can relate to. So, your story might not look exactly like mine, but perhaps you've had moments in your life where, you've thought, why am I not happy? Or maybe you've achieved certain things and you thought those would make you fulfilled, but you're sitting here and you're like, well, I'm still not happy. I'm still not satisfied. Something is missing. And I think a lot of the time we assume that the answer is outside of us. We don't really look internally. We think maybe it's we need a different job, we need a different relationship, we need to make more friends, we need to be more successful, or more confidence. And while I think those things are really impactful in our lives, I don't think it automatically changes the way we feel about ourselves. Because everywhere you go, there you are. The problem is still within you and how you feel. If you have a difficult relationship with yourself, it's going to follow you everywhere you go in every aspect of your life. It's going to show up in your friendships. It's going to show up in your romantic relationships. It's going to show up in your career. It's going to show up in your boundaries. It's even going to show up in the goals you set for yourself. For example, one of my goals has always been, to make content. And here I am, I'm making content finally. But me 3 years ago, I had a belief that I wasn't good enough to be making content or something is wrong with me. Like, I can't make content. So that really set me back when it came to my goals. And so the question becomes, how do we develop this relationship with ourselves? Like, where does it come from? And so the truth is, we're not born this way. We're not born hating ourselves. None of us come into this world thinking that we're not good enough or we're not lovable or we're not worthy. A lot of these beliefs are learned. Most of our beliefs are learned. And our relationship with ourselves begins to form in our early experiences. What I mean by early experiences is that it can be through experiences with your primary caregivers, which can be, mom and dad, grandma, grandpa, whoever took care of you primarily when you were growing up. And other experiences you might have that influenced your belief system is, elementary school. Were you getting bullied? Were you a popular kid? That all affects the beliefs you develop about yourself. So, for example, imagine being a child and imagine growing up in a consistent, loving home, an emotionally safe home. And so this child is more likely to develop a secure sense of self versus a child who has grown up with constant criticism, emotional neglect, and as the child that grew up in a household where their needs were not consistently met, is more likely to have learned that they need to earn people's love. And so they'll begin to have a different way of internalizing their emotions compared to that secure kid. And so for me, I grew up in a Punjabi household, and I am the eldest daughter and the only daughter. So with that, there comes a lot of responsibility and expectation to fulfill. A lot of the time, I would receive a lot of love, primarily if I was, succeeding or if I was achieving something, whether it was academically or whether it was through sports. And so my belief system growing up was I need to be perfect in order to be accepted, and I am not good enough as I am. And I think what's interesting about these beliefs that we develop is that we actually carry them into adulthood. And what I mean by that is that these beliefs we have, we actually begin to build a life around these beliefs. So, whether your beliefs are similar to mine or different, the result is the same. You start to make decisions that reinforce the beliefs you learned about yourself. You begin to prioritize acceptance over authenticity. And so you start becoming a version of yourself that you think people will approve of, people will like, people will stay for, rather than the genuine version of yourselves. And that's where self abandonment begins. It's not usually one big decision, it's little small ones that lead up to it. It's one boundary crossed, another boundary crossed, then another, and then it's a slippery slope down. This can be like when you say yes when you should actually be saying no. You ignore your intuition, you tolerate things that actually really annoy you or just don't sit right with you. You put people's needs above your own, and before you know it, you've drifted so far low that you don't even recognize the person you've become. And that's exactly what happened to me a couple years ago. I became a person that I no longer recognized. I thought about myself as a little girl, and I thought about the girl I wanted to be, or the woman I wanted to be when I grew up. And the woman I was then was not the woman I would have envisioned when I was younger. And I think part of that was that there was just so many expectations that I wanted to keep up with. I didn't want to let people down. I was in a relationship where I was so, so unhappy, but I think I was afraid to admit it because, you know, other people really wanted me to be in this relationship and I didn't want to, let them down. It's also maintaining friendships that didn't align with me, and I think that I was constantly seeking approval and putting people before me. And what the interesting thing about self-abandonment is that it doesn't only show up in big life decisions, it actually shows up in very tiny decisions too. Sometimes, for me at least, it looked like, spending money on dinners or like going out for activities and food when I knew I actually, like, it wasn't in my budget for that month. Sometimes it looked like agreeing to plans even though I should be prioritizing like rest and recovery or like, studying for exams. And this was because I felt guilty saying no and I didn't want to let people down. And sometimes it looked like silencing my own feelings and my own opinion just to avoid conflict. And so over time, these moments they add up. Okay, so you're probably wondering, how do I know I'm abandoning myself? And the thing is, I didn't realize I was abandoning myself in the moment. I thought I was being a good friend. I thought I was being a supportive partner. I thought I was being easygoing and fun and a great communicator and accommodating. But looking back, I can see that there's a big difference between being caring and also being self abandoning. Healthy relationships require compromise, and self abandonment requires self betrayal. In healthy relationships, you don't want to betray yourself. You still are true to yourself. And I think a lot of people confuse the two. And so we'll tell ourselves, it's not a big deal. I'll just let it go. I don't want to cause any problems. I don't want to disappoint anyone. But eventually, you'll begin to start paying attention to everyone else's needs and not your own. Some signs that you might be abandoning yourself might include people pleasing, struggling to say no, feeling responsible for other people's emotions and reactions, needing external validation to feel worthy, ignoring red flags, and staying in situations that you know are unhealthy for you. And so, if you're listening, you might be thinking, this sounds like me, but I want you to know that you're not broken. Most of us learned these patterns at one point of our life. These behaviors, these beliefs, they helped us feel safe, they helped us feel accepted, they helped us feel connected. But now, as an adult, they're not serving us anymore, so we need to let them go. And I think the biggest misconception about healing is self love. You'll hear people say, oh, just love yourself more. Just love yourself more. But if I'm being honest, like when I was at my lowest 3 years ago, if somebody told me, to love myself more, I'd be like, what is self love? Like, what do you mean by that? That advice did not even help me. How am I supposed to love myself if I don't even trust myself? I spent years ignoring my intuition. I spent years putting others' needs ahead of mine. I spent years breaking promises to myself. So, what I've learned is that self love doesn't start with self love, it starts with self trust. How can you love someone if you don't trust them? Think about any relationship in your life that's healthy. Trust comes first. You need to trust them in order to open up, in order to build that intimacy, to build that connection. And you have to apply that same thing to yourself. Now, self trust is built when you start showing up for yourself and your own needs. It's built when you listen to your intuition and you stop dismissing your own needs. It's built when your actions start matching what you know is right for you. So, for me, rebuilding self trust wasn't like this moment. It was a series of things that I've had to do through numerous years. And, it's been like, what, 3.5 years now? And I'm still continuing to build that relationship with myself. I'm still continuing to have self trust. And for me, some of the things I did was, ending relationships that were not aligned with who I wanted to become. I was learning how to say no without, having to explain myself, trying to get comfortable, spending more time alone and doing things alone. I actually just decided to start going to the pool alone, and that has been so cool. I've always thought that every summer I'm like, oh, I'm gonna go to the pool. I'm not gonna wait for anybody else, and it never ends up happening. And so this summer I'm like, I'm just gonna do it. And I did it, and it feels great. And so this leads to my next point is keeping promises to myself, even the tiny ones. I promised myself this summer that I would start doing more activities alone, and I'm keeping that. And that is how you build self-trust. It's by starting to choose yourself and not being, I guess, hesitant about even doing it. And every time you choose yourself, you're sending a message to yourself. You're sending the message that I can rely on me, that I got me. And so I want to ask you something. And this is the little exercise I was talking about, and this is going to get you thinking about your own relationship with yourself. So, if you had a relationship with yourself as a friend, would it be a healthy one? Would you trust that friend? Would you feel supported by that friend? Would you feel safe around that friend? Or would you feel criticized, ignored, dismissed, or constantly let down? Because if you think about it, the longest relationship you'll ever have is with yourself. Even though that's the longest relationship we have, this relationship with ourselves is the least invested relationship you'll see within everyone. We spend so much time trying to get people to choose us, but what happens if you start choosing yourself? I'm not saying be selfish and ignore everyone else's needs and, their boundaries. I mean, in a healthy way. What happens if you started listening to yourself, trusting yourself, honoring your needs, setting boundaries, walking away with things that no longer align from you? Because healing isn't about becoming like this new person. A lot of the time, healing is coming back to who you truly are before the world told you who to be. And when I look back to life 3 years ago, I don't think my biggest problem was the relationship I had or like the circumstances I was in or the friendships I had. The biggest problem was that I had lost myself. And I think I had spent so much time trying to pour into other people's cups that I started to pour less into my own cup. And I think a lot of us do this without even realizing. But this healing taught me something really important, that the relationship you have with yourself actually sets the standards for everything else. It influences what you tolerate, what you deserve, what people you allow into your life. It influences your goals, the way you speak about yourself, and the way you get things, Like going back to how I was afraid to start a podcast or like be on social media, talking negatively really set me back. So it's really important to recognize that everything starts there. And if you're listening to this episode and realizing that maybe you've been abandoning yourself, I want you to know that this awareness is a gift. This awareness is the beginning of change. I'm not saying that you're going to change your life overnight. I've spent 3.5 years trying to undo a whole lot of things I learned about myself that were untrue. And I am still continually doing that every day. Healing is going to start with one boundary changing, saying no for the first time, and then over time you're going to keep doing that. It's going to begin to look like listening to that voice in your head that you have ignored for years. It's going to start by keeping a promise to yourself, because every time you choose yourself, every time you honor your needs, you are rebuilding the relationship that matters the most, and that relationship is you. All right, guys, thank you so much for listening. This concludes the second episode. Oh my gosh. I hope you guys tune in next time, and I will see you all later. Bye.